Vibrational Fluency, The Art of Mastering Your Energy by Wisdom Matrix, 1111. Imagine for a moment that every thought you think, every emotion you feel, and every place where you direct your attention is quietly shaping the quality of the energy you live in. Most people move through the day, assuming their inner state is simply a reaction to circumstances. Something good happens and they feel uplifted. Something frustrating happens and their energy drops. It seems automatic, almost mechanical, as if our emotional atmosphere is determined entirely by the outside world. But what if that assumption is incomplete? What if your inner state is not just a reaction to life, but a form of vibration that you are constantly broadcasting and tuning at the same time? Think about the subtle difference between walking into a room where someone is calm, centered, and present, and walking into a room where someone is tense, irritated, or anxious. Even before a word is spoken, you can often feel the difference. Something about the atmosphere changes. Your body senses it immediately. That invisible atmosphere is what many traditions call energy, vibration, or frequency. You don't need to think of it in mystical terms to recognize the reality behind it. In everyday life, you already experience it. The emotional tone you carry influences how you speak, how you perceive situations, and even how other people respond to you. In other words, your inner state is not neutral. It has a texture, a tone, a vibrational quality. And the fascinating part is this: most people never learn how to consciously manage that vibrational state. They learn how to manage schedules, they learn how to manage tasks, they learn how to manage appearances. But very few people are taught how to manage the quality of their own energy. Yet that invisible layer of life quietly influences everything. Your clarity of mind, your emotional stability, the atmosphere you create around you, and even how resilient you remain in the face of stress. This brings us to the idea of vibrational fluency. In simple terms, vibrational fluency is the ability to become aware of your inner energetic state, learning how to adjust it, and learning how to maintain the quality of the atmosphere you carry with you throughout the day. The moment this awareness begins to develop, something interesting happens. You begin to realize that your inner atmosphere is not just something that happens to you. It's something that can be shaped consciously. And once that becomes clear, the experience of life begins to feel more intentional, more stable, and less driven by automatic reactions. So what vibration really means in everyday life? When people hear the word vibration, they sometimes imagine something mysterious or esoteric. But in many ways, the reality of it is actually very simple and very practical. Vibration, in this context, is just another way of describing the quality of your inner state. It's the emotional and mental atmosphere you are carrying within you at any given moment. Think about it this way. Your thoughts are not isolated events happening silently inside your head. Every thought subtly influences how you feel, and every feeling influences your posture, your tone of voice, your facial expressions, and the way you interpret what is happening around you. So the state you carry inside doesn't stay inside for very long. It naturally expresses itself outward. If your mind is calm and clear, your perception becomes calmer and clearer as well. Situations that might normally feel overwhelming suddenly appear manageable. You listen more carefully. You respond rather than react. But when your inner state is tense, irritated, or anxious, the entire world can start to look different. Small inconveniences feel larger. Neutral situations can be interpreted as negative. Conversations become sharper or more defensive. In other words, your inner vibration quietly shapes how you experience reality. And it doesn't stop there. It also influences how other people experience you. Have you ever noticed how quickly you can sense someone's mood even before they speak? You walk into a room and immediately feel that someone is frustrated, uneasy, or joyful. No explanation is needed. Your body reads the atmosphere almost instantly. Human beings are extremely sensitive to emotional signals. Most of this sensing happens unconsciously. This sensitivity isn't just poetic language. The human body is an electrical system. Your brain operates through electrical impulses, and your heart generates a measurable electromagnetic field that extends beyond the body. Every emotional state slightly alters these physiological patterns: your breathing rhythm, heart rate variability, muscle tension, and facial micro-expressions. Other nervous systems continuously pick up these signals, often without conscious awareness. In that sense, what we casually call vibration is closely connected to very real biological and energetic processes. Subtle cues in body language, breathing rhythm, facial tension, and tone of voice all communicate information about a person's internal state. So even if someone says, "I'm fine," their energy might tell a completely different story. This is why some individuals have a presence that feels naturally calming. When they enter a room, people seem to relax, conversations become more grounded, the emotional atmosphere softens. It's not necessarily because they are trying to influence anyone. Often they are simply carrying a steady inner state. Their thoughts are less chaotic, their emotions are more balanced, their attention is more present, and that inner coherence quietly affects the environment around them. On the other hand, you may also have encountered the opposite situation, someone whose presence immediately creates tension. Even if they haven't said anything critical yet, something about their mood feels heavy, impatient, or unsettled. Again, this usually isn't intentional. It's simply the natural consequence of the internal state they are carrying at that moment. All of this shows something important. Energy, mood, and vibration are not abstract philosophical ideas. They are part of the practical psychology of everyday life. Your inner state influences how clearly you think, how patiently you respond, how people feel around you, and even how situations tend to unfold. And once you begin to see this, a new question naturally arises. If our inner atmosphere affects perception, behavior, and relationships so profoundly, then learning how to manage the quality of that inner atmosphere becomes a very valuable skill. That is exactly what vibrational fluency is about. Not controlling life, not forcing positivity, but learning to become aware of the state you're carrying and gradually developing the ability to adjust it consciously. Because when your inner vibration becomes steadier, clearer, and more intentional, something interesting begins to happen. You no longer move through life simply reacting to the emotional climate around you. Gradually, you begin to influence that climate yourself. And once you realize that this is possible, the next step becomes clear. Learning how to recognize, stabilize, and consciously shape the quality of the state you carry within you. If vibration is the quality of your inner state, then the next question becomes obvious. What actually shapes that state? Why do some days feel clear and balanced, while other days feel scattered, heavy, or draining? In most cases, it comes down to three quiet forces that are always operating within you: your thoughts, your emotions, and your attention. These three work together almost like a tuning system. They determine the tone of your inner atmosphere. Your thoughts are constantly interpreting the world. They label experiences, judge situations, imagine possibilities, and sometimes replay events again and again. Every thought carries a subtle emotional signal. Some thoughts generate curiosity or inspiration. Others trigger worry, irritation, or discouragement. Over time, the thoughts you habitually entertain begin shaping the emotional state of your mind. Then come your emotions, which are not just psychological reactions, but also energetic states. Emotions influence breathing patterns, muscle tension, heart rhythm, and even the pace of your thinking. When you feel calm or grateful, your body settles into a different rhythm than when you feel anxious or frustrated. So emotions deepen and reinforce the signals your thoughts begin. And then there is attention, which is often the most underestimated factor of all. Attention is like the spotlight of the mind. Wherever your attention goes, your mental and emotional energy follows. If your attention constantly focuses on problems, comparisons, worries, or frustrations, those experiences become amplified in your inner world. They occupy more psychological space. They grow louder. But if your attention learns to return to clarity, presence, curiosity, or appreciation, your internal environment gradually shifts in that direction. In other words, attention feeds energy into whatever it repeatedly observes. Now, the challenge most people face today is that these three forces, thoughts, emotions, and attention, are constantly being pulled in many different directions. Modern life makes it surprisingly easy to lose balance internally. One of the biggest reasons is constant digital noise. Think about how often the mind is interrupted during the day. Notifications appear, messages arrive, news updates scroll endlessly. Social media presents an infinite stream of opinions, conflicts, achievements, anxieties, and comparisons. Each small interruption pulls your attention somewhere new. Your mind rarely gets a moment to settle. When attention becomes fragmented like this, your inner energy also becomes scattered. It becomes harder to feel grounded or mentally clear because your awareness is constantly jumping from stimulus to stimulus. Another subtle influence comes from absorbing other people's emotional turbulence. Human beings naturally resonate with each other emotionally. When you spend time around someone who is angry, stressed, or pessimistic, you may start to feel some of that tension yourself, even if you originally felt calm. This doesn't mean people are deliberately projecting negativity. It's simply a natural form of emotional contagion. Our nervous systems are highly responsive to the moods of others. Without awareness, it's easy to carry emotional states that were never truly yours to begin with. Then there is a third pattern that quietly drains inner stability: negative thought loops. Sometimes the mind locks into repetitive cycles, replaying past mistakes, imagining future problems, or analyzing situations long after they have ended. The mind begins asking questions that have no satisfying answer. Why did that happen? What if this goes wrong? What did they mean by that? And each time the loop repeats, the emotional tone attached to it strengthens. This is how stress responses build momentum. What begins as a small concern can grow into a persistent inner atmosphere of tension simply because attention keeps feeding it. Finally, there is the broader pattern of living reactively rather than consciously. When life is lived purely in reaction mode, your inner state becomes dependent on whatever happens externally. A message determines your mood. A comment changes your energy. A piece of news shifts your outlook. Your internal climate becomes unstable because it is constantly responding to external triggers. And when this happens repeatedly, people often feel as if their energy is being drained by the world around them. But the deeper truth is slightly different. The real issue is not the events themselves. The issue is that attention, thoughts, and emotions are operating automatically rather than intentionally. Once you begin to recognize this pattern, something important becomes possible. You start to see that vibrational fluency is not about forcing yourself to feel positive all the time. Instead, it begins with a simple but powerful skill: learning to notice where your attention is going, what thoughts you are repeatedly feeding, and what emotional atmosphere those patterns are creating within you. Because the moment you become aware of these patterns, you are no longer completely controlled by them. And that awareness becomes the first step towards something even more powerful, learning how to stabilize and protect your inner energy, even when the external world is chaotic. So once you begin to understand that your thoughts, emotions, and attention shape your inner atmosphere, the next step naturally becomes practical. How do you maintain balance in a world that constantly pulls at your energy? This is where the idea of vibrational fluency becomes useful, not as something mystical, but as a kind of inner skill. A way of managing your internal state with awareness rather than leaving it entirely to circumstance. Just as someone can become fluent in a language by learning how words flow together, you can become fluent in your inner life by learning how your thoughts, emotions, and attention interact. And the first principle in this practice is surprisingly simple: healthy emotional boundaries. Many people assume boundaries are only about how you deal with other people, but emotional boundaries actually begin inside your own mind. Without them, your inner state becomes like an open room where every opinion, mood, complaint, or conflict from the outside world is allowed to enter and linger. Think about how often this happens. Someone expresses frustration, and you carry that frustration long after the conversation ends. You read a piece of upsetting news, and your mind keeps replaying it for hours. You scroll through social media and suddenly feel comparison, irritation, or subtle discouragement that wasn't there a moment earlier. None of these experiences seem dramatic in isolation, but over time they accumulate, shaping the emotional tone of your day. This is why emotional boundaries matter. They allow you to recognize that not every emotional signal around you needs to become part of your internal state. Just because someone else is stressed does not mean your nervous system must adopt that stress. Just because negativity appears in your environment does not mean it has to take residence in your mind. Vibrational fluency begins with the ability to notice these incoming signals and quietly decide which ones deserve your attention. And that ability grows through a few simple but powerful habits. The first is awareness of your thoughts. Most people think thousands of thoughts every day without noticing the patterns those thoughts form. The mind jumps quickly from one idea to another, creating a stream that runs almost automatically. But when you start paying attention to that stream, something interesting happens. You begin to see certain themes repeating. Certain worries return again and again. Certain assumptions color how you interpret situations. Certain inner dialogues quietly shape how you feel about yourself or about life. Awareness doesn't mean you have to fight these thoughts. In fact, trying to suppress them often makes them stronger. Instead, awareness simply creates a small space between you and the thoughts passing through your mind. And in that space, you regain choice. You begin to realize that not every thought deserves to be believed or repeated. The next practice is emotional regulation. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel cheerful all the time. Human emotions are natural signals, and they all have their place. But emotional regulation means learning to recognize when an emotion is beginning to dominate your inner landscape. Instead of letting frustration spiral into anger or stress escalate into anxiety, you gently interrupt the momentum. Sometimes this can be as simple as slowing your breathing for a moment, or stepping away from a situation before reacting, or allowing yourself a few minutes of quiet reflection before responding. These small pauses give the nervous system time to recalibrate, and over time, they help stabilize the emotional tone of your day. Another important practice is protecting your mental space. Just as you would be selective about who enters your home, it's wise to be selective about what repeatedly enters your mind. This includes the media you consume, the conversations you engage in, and the environments you place yourself in. If your mental space is constantly filled with outrage, conflict, comparison, or pessimism, it becomes difficult for clarity and calm to flourish. But when you consciously choose what influences you allow to dominate your attention, your inner atmosphere begins to feel more spacious and balanced. Then there is the practice of intentional focus. Remember that attention functions like a spotlight. Wherever it shines, energy flows. If you allow attention to wander endlessly through distractions and anxieties, your mental energy becomes scattered. But when you deliberately focus on meaningful tasks, thoughtful reflection, or creative pursuits, attention gathers itself. It becomes concentrated rather than fragmented. This simple shift often produces a surprising result, a sense of mental steadiness. You begin to feel less reactive and more grounded, simply because your awareness is no longer being pulled in dozens of directions at once. Finally, one of the most powerful stabilizing practices is something remarkably simple: gratitude. Gratitude doesn't ignore life's challenges. Instead, it trains attention to recognize the aspects of life that support and sustain you. When the mind regularly notices small sources of appreciation, a moment of quiet, a helpful conversation, a beautiful scene, a simple comfort, it subtly changes the emotional background of your experience. Over time, gratitude builds an inner orientation toward abundance rather than scarcity, and that orientation quietly elevates the overall tone of your energy. When these practices come together, awareness of thoughts, emotional regulation, protecting mental space, intentional focus, and gratitude, you begin developing a kind of inner stability. Your state no longer swings wildly with every external event. Instead, you develop something much more valuable, a steady internal center. And from that center, your presence itself begins to change. You move through situations with more clarity. You respond rather than react. You carry a calmer, more coherent energy into your interactions with others. In other words, vibrational fluency is not about controlling the world around you. It's about becoming skillful in the way you manage the invisible atmosphere within you. And when that inner state becomes clear and balanced, it naturally influences the way you experience everything else. When you step back and look at everything we've discussed, a simple insight begins to emerge. In many ways, mastery of life begins with mastery of your inner state. Not mastery in the sense of controlling every thought or emotion perfectly. That's neither realistic nor necessary. Life will always bring moments of uncertainty, challenge, and unpredictability. But what becomes possible is something quieter and more powerful. You begin learning how to return to balance. Instead of being pulled in every direction by external events, you develop the ability to stabilize your own inner environment. Your thoughts become more intentional. Your emotions move through you without completely taking over. Your attention becomes something you guide, rather than something that is constantly hijacked by the noise of the world. And over time, this inner steadiness begins to influence many aspects of your life in subtle but meaningful ways. First, it affects your relationships. People may not consciously analyze another person's energy, but they definitely feel it. When someone carries a stable, calm presence, it naturally creates space for others to relax as well. Conversations become more grounded. Conflicts become easier to navigate. Emotional reactions soften because one person in the interaction is no longer feeding the turbulence. In this way, your inner stability becomes something that quietly benefits the people around you. Then there is creativity. A scattered mind rarely produces clear ideas. When attention is constantly divided, inspiration struggles to take shape. But when your inner atmosphere becomes more coherent, when thoughts slow down and attention gathers, something interesting happens. Your mind begins to notice connections that were previously hidden. Ideas arrive more easily. Solutions appear with less strain. Creativity flows not because you force it, but because your mental space has become open enough for new patterns to emerge. This clarity also strengthens something many people describe as intuition. Intuition is often misunderstood as something mysterious or supernatural, but in many cases, it is simply the mind recognizing patterns beneath the surface of conscious thought. When your inner state is noisy and reactive, those subtle signals are easily drowned out. But when the mind becomes quieter and more balanced, you start noticing small internal signals, an instinct about a decision, a subtle sense of direction, a quiet feeling that something is right or wrong. These signals were always there. A calm inner atmosphere simply makes them easier to hear. And then there is something even more subtle, the way people experience your presence. You've probably encountered individuals who seem naturally grounding to be around. They don't necessarily say anything extraordinary. They're not forcing positivity or projecting an image, yet being near them somehow feels stabilizing. Often this happens because their inner state is relatively coherent. Their thoughts, emotions, and attention are not constantly fighting each other. Their presence carries a quiet consistency. And when someone reaches that level of vibrational fluency, their presence itself becomes a kind of influence, not through force, not through persuasion, but through the simple fact that clarity tends to calm confusion and steadiness tends to settle chaos. This is why developing awareness of your inner atmosphere is not just a personal exercise. It gradually becomes something that shapes the environment around you. Your reactions change. Your attention becomes more deliberate. Your emotional tone stabilizes. And through these small shifts, life begins to feel lighter and clearer. Not necessarily easier in every moment, but more navigable, more intentional, more aligned with the kind of person you are becoming. In essence, vibrational fluency is not about chasing higher energy or achieving some perfect state of positivity. It is about becoming skillful in caring for the invisible space within you, the space where thoughts arise, emotions move through, and attention decides what will grow. Because when that inner space becomes clear and balanced, something remarkable happens. Your experience of the world begins to change. And from that place of quiet awareness, you start living not as someone constantly reacting to life, but as someone who is consciously shaping the quality of the life you experience. And that may be one of the most meaningful forms of mastery one can develop. Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Matrix 1111. I hope this exploration of vibrational fluency resonated with you and offered a few insights you can carry into your daily life. If you found this reflection meaningful, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what part of this message spoke to you the most. Your thoughts and reflections always enrich the conversation here. And remember, remain present with the quality of your inner state. Stay aligned with the vibration you wish to live in. Until next time, peace.